This idea that if we can forgive our parents or connect with them and get an apology for them, the past can be kind of washed away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm very practical. And unfortunately, it's very...
Dear Shandy. Welcome back to Dear Shandy, listeners. Hello, Andy.
Hello.
How are you today?
Doing good.
We have a big one today.
Yeah.
And honestly, this one's so big that even though 2 months ago this was supposed to happen, and we woke up the morning of, we've never done this before.
No, we've worked with sickness, but not COVID.
Yes, exactly. We have never canceled on a guest the day of, we don't cancel on guests, period.
No, we don't.
We take that very seriously, but we both woke up the morning we were supposed to record with our guest, today's guest, with COVID.
Yeah, and a bad COVID.
Yeah, and I was so worried that she was going to be like, screw you guys.
Yeah.
And sort of never come back. But thankfully, she gave us another chance and has returned. And we're so happy because I feel like this is a topic that is going to really resonate with our listeners. We call them our Shandies.
Yeah, some of them were very upset.
Oh,
they thought we were faking it.
Yeah.
They're like, how dare you? We were waiting for this one.
Yeah. Some people were like, you teased an episode with
what's going
Anna
on?
Runkle. Where is it? So, okay, our guest today. First, I have to go over why she's such a wonderful guest. Anna Runkle, better known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy, is a coach and speaker. She has amassed a whopping 850,000 subscribers on her brilliant and informative YouTube channel, Crappy Childhood Fairy. You can even see her YouTube thingy in the background there. And she is the author of the upcoming book, Re-Regulated, Set Your Life Free from Childhood PTSD and the Trauma-Driven Behaviors That Keep You Stuck. She can be found on each Instagram and TikTok at Crappy Childhood Fairy. Thank you so much, Anna Runkle, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hello, Shandy. I like your name.
So before we get going, I just have a quick disclaimer. And that is today's conversation is meant to be more anecdotal guidance and is not intended to substitute professional mental health counseling, diagnosis, or treatment. Anna Runkle. Sometimes when we tease hot topic guests like yourself, sometimes it kind of catches me off guard which topic will elicit the most questions. And I was really struck at how when we advertised you and just even the name, I think it's so brilliant, the Crappy Childhood Fairy, it really brought about a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. And so let's start at the very beginning, just so we're all on the same page. Could you give us definitions of each complex PTSD and what you have coined childhood PTSD?
Yeah, there's a colloquial term, childhood PTSD, and I think everybody instinctively understands what it is. But the clinical word for it is complex PTSD, which doesn't always come from childhood, but it usually does. And that's the kind of PTSD that comes not from a single event or a combat episode. It can come from chronic ongoing exposure to stress, like growing up in an abusive household or maybe living in a war zone. But I talk to people who grew up with abuse and neglect in their childhood.
Mm. Okay, so when you refer to CPTSD in your teachings, which one are you usually referring to childhood, correct?
That means complex. It drives people crazy because I will talk about childhood PTSD and yeah, but it's complex PTSD. That's the clinical term. But does everybody know what that is? No. Childhood PTSD is just everybody knows what we're talking about.
Totally. Sure. It's just sort of unfortunate that they start with the same letter.
I know.
It's just kid PTSD. KPTSD.
Okay. In my research, I saw that you call loneliness the number one symptom of childhood trauma. Could you explain this?
Well, I observed that there's a lot of symptoms from trauma, and we'll talk about those today. But feeling like you didn't get the memo on how to belong with other people is almost universal with people who had childhood trauma. And really, my sample has been my YouTube channel. I get hundreds and hundreds of comments and letters. And a lot of times people tell me about their background and the problem they're having now. And the videos that I make about like, I don't fit in, I'm not listened to, I never feel like I belong, I feel stressed out in groups. Those videos always perform so strongly. This is something that so many people relate to. And I think loneliness is something a lot of people feel, but early trauma can disrupt your neurological, wiring to be able to feel connected. And that adds this extra element to it.
When you talk about loneliness, feeling like you don't belong, is that like the root of that is that you feel like you don't belong in your own family?
Some people do feel like that. I suspect that a lot of it has to do with neglect in the early years when most kids would be forming their mirror neurons because of interacting with their mom and dad and, getting feedback and goo, goo, goo and smiles and responsiveness. If you're just sort of left alone to deal with things as a small kid, there's a neurological injury that goes on. What's in effect an injury where things can't develop at the right rate. So what I seek to do in Crappy Childhood Fairy is create tools and environment where we can catch up. But what a lot of people do when they have this injury is they avoid people because being around people can be so triggering.
Very interesting.
Wow.
Can you truly heal childhood trauma, or is it something one must have to learn to live with?
Well, when we use the word trauma, I like to think of trauma as what happened. So you can't change what happened. But the injury that happened, there's a lot you can change about it. And for every person, it's going to be a little bit of a different ratio of things you have to live with and things that you can actually heal. So I teach people first, once you have even a name for it, like there's a word for this. I didn't even know this till 10 years ago. I was like slugging it out, figuring out how to change my life. I used to suffer so much. And then I learned these techniques that I still teach called the daily practice 30 years ago, and they helped me feel better. But it was only 10 years ago, the name for this problem, complex PTSD, I read it in Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. And it was this huge light going on for me. Like, that's exactly what it is. And that a core piece of it is dysregulation. So my book focuses in on all the problems with neurological dysregulation, which was completely missed in most of the decades of therapy for people with trauma.
I was struck by that when I went through your website. It's pretty incredible how you just sort of found out a lot of it on your own. It sounds like you just you wanted to heal yourself.
Well, yeah, my life was a wreck 30 years ago, and I was holding it together pretty well in many ways. I had an okay job. I had some friends. I had pretty difficult romantic relationships. But this often happens to people who have complex PTSD, is they hold it together for a while and then a trauma storm, I call it a trauma storm, a whole bunch of bad things happen at once. And it will sort of like break open the bag of cats or let the genie out of the bottle. And the old symptoms that you were holding together with healthy compartmentalization sort of just come pouring out and you can't get them back in. So for me, there was this terrible couple of weeks where I was dealing with a very badly broken heart. I got attacked on the street, beaten unconscious, randomly, head injury, and my mother died. And this all happened in a short amount of time. And it was enough present day trauma, which I would say it's fair to say I had PTSD, just, regular adult onset PTSD. All the old childhood wounds came out. Now we think of childhood wounds as like, I remember this thing. It wasn't about memories about the past. It was a super disorganization of my mental functioning. I couldn't read. I couldn't use a phone. I would have a panic attack trying to cross the street. The doctor said, I'm looking at your brain scan. It looks fine. No bleeding. I went to the therapist and the therapist said, I think you need to talk about this more. What happened? Why don't you come 3 times a week and talk more about it? So I would go to each therapy appointment after all these bad things happened. And I would arrive like, I'm going to really work on it today. I'm going to get better. I'm going to try to pull my life together. And then I would leave shaking, crying, unable to feel my hands, couldn't drive a car. And nobody knew what it was. And the therapist said, well, it's going to get worse before it gets better. It's going to take a long time. You're dealing with a lot of stuff. But what it was PTSD. It was PTSD from the present and complex PTSD from the past, disrupting my neurological functioning. Everything, neurology refers to like everything that goes on, your thinking, your hormones, your ability to remember and learn and focus, your moods. It governs everything in your body. And so when that's kind of going out of sync, a lot of bad things can happen.
So tell me the journey you went on. Did you start reading? Did you go online? What happened for you to come to this understanding?
Well, so I grew up in a family that had a lot of alcoholism, and it's well known what kind of problems families like that have. And we had all of them. We were poor. There was violence. There was, a lot of neglect of the kids. We were hungry sometimes. There were scary adults kind of roaming through the house and nobody to sort of protect us from them. And it was when I was about 30 that the wounds really started to get me. I learned these techniques from a woman who was in AA. I'm not in AA. I'm not an alcoholic, but we were friends through some theater thing. And she showed me, she said, do you want to see what I'm doing? And I had, for some reason, chosen to tell her how desperate I was. I was really feeling like I couldn't go on. I was having such a hard time. I had pushed everyone away in my life. I was depressed, and I was about to get fired from my job for shooting my mouth off and saying inappropriate things, which is classic PTSD. And they had said I had to come back to work after the assault. And I needed the money, so I had to go back to work when I was still pretty messed up from the assault. So things were not going well for me. And I confided in her one night. I felt like this is it. I think tomorrow I can't do this anymore. And she said, come inside. I'll show you something that I do. And it was great. It was so natural. It wasn't judgy. And she showed me a writing technique, and then later a meditation technique I could use. And she said, I don't know, it made me feel better. It allowed her, she had been living on the streets as a teenager, and she was an alcoholic. It allowed her to get sober and stay sober. And she said, I know you're not an alcoholic, but who knows, maybe it will help you. And it just helped me instantly. I felt so much better the next day.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very strong. And I can tell you now that it was re-regulating me, but I had no framework for what was the problem and why is this working. I just knew that it did work. So it was decades of working out all the life problems that tend to go with anybody who's lived their life dysregulated, terrible relationships, emotional outbursts at work.
Right.
It took me a long time to resolve that stuff. But when I first learned it, I went to the 12-step program for families of alcoholics because I certainly qualified. And I spent about 25 years there. I sponsored hundreds of women. I got a lot of practice helping them and teaching them my daily practice. And so I was very in touch with the benefits of the daily practice for a long time without ever knowing what the problem was. But I kind of knew, yes, I was affected by my mother's drinking and other family members too. But there's something in here. And my mom had died about the same year that I learned these techniques. And years were going by, and I was still having the same symptoms. So I knew it was in here. It was in here. And I never had a word for it. I felt like the only person who was like this. So when I heard the phrase CPTSD, I read the book because I was getting married, and my husband, I'd kind of flipped out on my husband about something. I was under stress, and he asked if I could do something, and I was like, and he said, you know what? We can't get married unless you figure out why you have these huge lash outs. I can't deal with it. And I thought, oh, well, it'll be fine. Let's just go ahead. And he was like, nope, we're canceling the wedding.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was devastating. And so because he did that, I took it very seriously. And I'm still with him. We did get married later, 7 months later. But in order to save the day and to show him I will find out what this is, I do care. I bought these books. One of them was the Van der Kolk book that's very well known. One of them was Pete Walker's CPTSD From Surviving to Thriving. And I think Amazon recommended it. And I read them both as fast as I could. And that was just the second turning point in my life when I had a name for what was wrong. And I went to Al-Anon and I said, hey, everybody, I know this is an outside issue, but there's this thing called CPTSD. And I think it's what I have, and maybe you do too. And I said, talk to me after the meeting if you want to talk. And basically everybody in the meeting surrounded me. So we all went to my house and we had a chat about it. And I realized I couldn't even teach everybody what I had to teach about it. So I soon started a blog post. I made a couple of blog posts. Then I needed to show the writing technique. So I made a video and I stuck that on YouTube to stream it into the blog. And then one day I thought, I'm going to put another video. And I had, 50 or 60 subscribers to the blog, some friends, basically. I went over to YouTube and lo and behold, just from one video, I had 2,000 subscribers.
Wow.
So that was another turning point where I realized video is my friend. And this is how I can teach this. And what was happening there was people were commenting and saying, I can't believe somebody has just described what it's like to be me. And that's how I felt. Right. That's how I felt when they said that. So like, alone. I can't believe you relate to me. And now I know there's like jillions of people everywhere, and the symptom pattern is very similar.
Right.
And so thanks to putting this out there on YouTube, I have very good insight into what does this look like? How do people experience it? What are the patterns when they have this kind of childhood? How does it tend to show up? And there are patterns. So gradually it's gotten taken seriously by the professionals.
Oh. Can you describe some of those patterns, the most common patterns you've seen?
Yeah. Well, the central symptoms are feeling discombobulated when you're under stress. You know, like you can't remember what you were doing, can't remember what you were saying, you can't remember where you were driving. You drive off with the gas pump in the car. You feel clumsy. You can't find your words for things. And that's a form of neurological dysregulation. Also, sometimes when you feel emotional, like angry or scared about something, it gets too big. It comes out so big. And you know on some level as it's happening that you're doing damage, but you can't stop. There's like this, it's called emotional dysregulation. Ooh, it comes out too strong. And that also is because neurologically, there's something changed in the brain where the part where you're thinking has gone dim and the part where you're feeling is going strong. And so that's somebody who was traumatized as a kid. That's the pattern of what they do under stress. And so you'll also see things that we always instinctively knew were associated with childhood trauma, like a higher rate of addiction and depression and anxiety and maybe terrible relationships. But specifically, these attachment wound relationships where maybe you get involved impulsively in a relationship with somebody you don't really know. And the attachment wound is laying there in wait so that if you say sleep with somebody you don't know very well, and you find out very quickly they're not a good person for you, it's very hard to leave because you have this like abandonment trigger that gets set off. And it feels like worse than death to leave. It'd be better to stay with somebody you can't stand and who's dangerous than to go through the intense emotions that come up when you end a relationship or get left. Wow. And so that's like that combination of like impulsive getting into the relationship and then not being able to get out of it sucks years of life out of people who are traumatized and who are perfectly good and loving people. But they get sucked into these terrible relationships. So
Charlene, since we've been using Pestly insect repellent, there's one thing that I do miss that I'm a little nostalgic about.
Oh, what? I'm actually very curious because what could one possibly miss about bug bites?
Having that really satisfying mosquito bite itch. We now no longer have the joy of itching multiple mosquito bites because this summer, I swear to you, and I don't need to swear to you, but you're going to swear to me.
I'm on the same page.
We have not been bitten by mosquitoes. As a matter of fact, mosquitoes don't even come around.
No, Pestly insect repellent has been an absolute game changer. But my favorite part of all is that it is DEET-free, 100% all natural. And usually, you hear about all natural and you're like, oh, well, it's not going to work.
Right.
Right. I'm going to be honest. There are some products I feel that way about.
Or it's going to stink.
Pestly, all natural bug spray. This is such a game changer. They use science, microencapsulation technology. They encapsulate the active ingredients so you don't need to spray as much, you don't need to use as much, and you don't need to reapply as often. This is crucial because one of the big problems with bug spray is the terrible bug spray experience.
Yes, it stinks.
It stinks.
It stinks up your whole house.
Oh, it gives me headaches.
It can cause rashes.
Yes, I can count the number of mosquito bites I've had this spring, summer on one hand. And those were moments, I remember them because I was like, oh, I forgot Pestly in the car. Or, oh, Pestly's in my bag. It was the bug bite that reminded me to put on Pestly, and then I didn't get any more.
Can I tell you something? Pestly's so good that it's made me think that I don't get bitten by mosquitoes.
Yes.
So I sometimes don't bring it out. And I'm like, oh, I do actually get bitten by mosquitoes when I'm not wearing this.
Yes. And Pestly only makes one product.
This is it.
Like literally, they're called Pestly. This is all they do is this bug spray.
They love this bug spray. They don't even care about making money. They just want people not to be bitten by mosquitoes.
Yeah, the person who invented Pestily hates getting bitten by mosquitoes.
And hates making money.
Finally, Pestily is hypoallergenic, dermatologist tested, safe for sensitive skin, also little ones. That's a big thing too, is kids. And finally, shake well. Don't forget to shake well.
Always shake well.
So protect yourself and your loved ones this season with safe, all-natural, and science-backed Pestily.
Go to pestily.co and use code Shandy for 40% off plus free shipping on all U.S. orders.
Again, that's Pestily, PESTLY.co, and use code Shandy for a whopping 40% off.
Pestily, the better bug spray.
So because I know obviously you have an entire book about this, you have hours upon hours of videos about this, but if you could give like a sampler for anyone who's not familiar with your content, what do you mean by the writing techniques, the meditation techniques, anything to sort of, give someone I don't know.
At least tease it.
Yeah, tease it.
Without giving away the secret sauce.
No, it's not secret. I give it away for free to everyone who wants it in the whole wide world. Care. I'm on a mission. Yeah. And it's a free course that people can get. I'll give you the link so you can share it with your listeners.
Description.
It's a free course, about an hour long, and it's got a lot of FAQs, and it's also covered in detail in my book, as well as, what is this thing? So it's a writing technique that involves writing your fearful and resentful thoughts on paper, and then following it with asking for them to be removed if somebody is oriented towards God or a higher power, or releasing them if that's more how they see the nature of their reality. But in any case, trying to get free of fearful and resentful thoughts. Now, I thought it was random that this worked, but it turns out that complex trauma causes an injury to the ability to process thoughts and emotions. So they do get jammed up. That's exactly what it feels like. There's just like a lot of thoughts and feelings just knocking around in there like ping pong balls. And it's very hard to be present or to hear or to pay attention or to connect because there's so much noise. And it turns out that's part of the injury. And so what I now think, and I've had a chance to talk to researchers like James Pennebaker from the University of Texas at Austin, who have done years of research on writing as a way to release emotional, intense junk, and finding that there's like lasting benefits to it. He really gave his blessings to this technique, and as a way to assist the processing of thoughts and feelings. It moves along. It just moves along. So normally, like when you have PTSD, you could be remembering something from 2 years ago, but you still get a big charge of adrenaline and cortisol when you think about it. And it kind of throws you into a panic because you drive past some place where the bad thing happened. When you've processed a memory, a thought or a feeling, it turns into a memory. So you can recall that memory. If somebody said, do you remember when that happened? You can say, yeah, I remember what happened. You can tell the details, but your whole body doesn't react as if it's happening right now. It's so liberating. So that's a lot of what it's like to have complex PTSD. You're constantly reacting as if you're unsafe. It's happening and you don't even know why. You don't, often it happened at a time before you had language. You don't even know, where is this even coming from? You're just having this very strong, emotional reaction to seemingly nothing.
A lot of this sounds like self-work, the meditation technique, the writing techniques. How much, if at all, do you think to heal is to confront the parent that mistreated you or neglected you, or to, actively try to forgive them? Like, how much of healing is in revisiting that person or that experience? In
my approach to healing, we don't really emphasize those things. What happened in the past and what other people did. That's a lot of what we were told would help us. But for those of us who weren't helped by that, there's a better way. And that's to focus on, what symptoms am I having right now? What behavior comes out of me when I'm feeling that way? And can I work on that and start changing the course of my life? Wow. Things can get so much better when you can become aware. I'm dysregulated right now, so I'm not going to drive a car. I'm not going to decide to go home with somebody. I'm not going to talk to my boss about something that's making me angry. I'm going to re-regulate first. Wow. And everything changes. Yeah.
That is so interesting. So there's a lot of cold, hard acceptance, I would imagine, in that. Like not living in the past and being like, feeling resentful, feeling angry. I feel like when I hear you say that you don't focus on confronting the person or trying to find quote unquote closure.
Yeah. There were a lot of questions from our Shandies that sort of circled around the idea that if you were to, I'm sorry,
which we're going to get to, because a lot of them are around like parents who are still alive.
Right. So they were all circling the wagons around this idea that if we can forgive our parents or connect with them and get an apology for them, the past can be kind of washed away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm very practical. And unfortunately, it's very rare that confronting parents turns out the way you'd like it to.
Oh my God.
They're the sort of people who did it in the first place.
Yeah,
they're the sort of people who gaslight you and ridicule you now.
Yeah.
And then push you out of the house because you're a troublemaker. So that's no good. So I think in some cases, people are lucky enough that there is some kind of reconciliation, but I think it's really rare.
Yeah.
And even if a parent came around and said, I get it now. I'm so sorry what I did. I can see how that affected you. And I wish I had done it differently. And it's my fault, not yours. If they had said all those things, you'd still have the neurological injury. Mm-hmm. So it would be nice. It would help your relationship with that parent, but you'd still have the neurological injury that would make you overreactive and struggling to connect. It doesn't make it go away.
Right. So there's no closure. Really... There's no closure with people. It's almost like when someone's put to death and the person whose loved one was killed by them is like, oh, now I feel nothing. That did nothing for me.
Yeah, I think closure it's a nice idea, but it's seldom. It's just one of those things, like particularly in relationships where somebody's had their heart broken and they want to get closure. Honestly, I think that usually means they want reopening.
Yes.
Get it going again.
Yes.
I happen to agree about that.
That's so true.
Yeah.
What does that mean? How is closure? Closure is exactly what you don't want. Is the end.
Closure is when you don't have fear and resentment about it anymore. You're not reacting to it anymore. It's a memory. It did happen, but it doesn't supercharge you and drive your life and push you towards these terrible relationships and decisions and, increase your risk of cancer. Because that's another major symptom of complex PTSD is chronic disease.
Wow.
All of it elevated very much. And so when you can get re-regulated, you can reduce that health risk a lot. And you'll find there's things like gratitude, acceptance, forgiveness. These are very nice things that sort of fall upon you when you have less fear and resentment. You don't have to manufacture them.
Very
they naturally just sort of show up in your heart and mind, or they might. I think that there's been some damage done by people who say you have to forgive. Like that's just not. It's not genuinely possible in many cases to do that because nothing's resolved. You still feel all damaged. Everybody's just like belittling you about it. So that's very difficult. You'd have to be a saint. But when you have less fear and resentment, which is what my daily practice technique is daily, twice a day. I've done it for 30 years. So I have very little energy around like what happened to me anymore. I can tell you what it was, but it doesn't define me. It doesn't, I won't say that it doesn't influence me. I still get kind of dysregulated sometimes, but that's more like the neurological injury. It's not the people anymore. They've been gone so long. It's what's in here now.
Right.
And me trying to become my full and real self.
Right. So the whys aren't important. That's not what you're working on. It's the how.
Well,
how to move
I won't say
forward.
they're not important, but the solution isn't there. I think that everybody who's been abused or neglected, it's helpful at some point to tell the truth about it and to get a little validation and to just realize you didn't cause that. You were a little kid. And the symptoms that have resulted, you didn't cause those either, but now you're stuck with them and only you can heal them. And so some people find that they're like, that's blaming the victim, but it's not. It's just like being very practical. It's like truly nobody's going to come along and fix these symptoms for you.
Okay. Wow. First of all, that was a lot to process. Yeah. I really respect this take, by the way. One of my questions was, and like Andy said, we got a lot of questions that circled around these themes. And I distilled many of them down to is to forgive, to heal. And basically what you're saying is not necessarily.
Forgiveness is a fruit of healing.
Oh, I like that.
Wow.
Okay. So speaking of practicality, let's say, a person is now a grown adult and their parents are still around. We're going to ask for some tips about specific situations on like dealing with parents who did give you that crappy childhood and whether or not you should still engage with them, or is that still dwelling on the past to hold it against them in some way? The main question is how to forgive a parent when they're still exhibiting the behaviors they did in your childhood.
There are many colors in between, like completely being in the trouble and then forgiveness. Those are not the only two poles. A really good place to be is having boundaries and just being like, I kind of want to see my family, but I don't want to get sucked into all the drama this time. And to start using some skills to be able to, let's say Thanksgiving holiday, you go home and all the drunks are there and the people who abused you, as well as some people you really wanted to see. So some of us do want to have a relationship with family, even though that stuff happened. And once we start to get some freedom from the idea that we must get them to, acknowledge what they did. And I have experience with that. I tried till my mother's death from cancer to make her acknowledge what she did, and she never did. And guess what? I healed anyway. So if I can do it, I think most people can, but the damage can be quite severe, and you don't have to go home to those people. And it can be so dysregulating that you can't work for 3 days after you see people like that. So that's something to weigh. But I always think like going no contact. It's nice if you can take it 1 day at a time or 1 year at a time. You don't have to decide forever what you're going to do about this. You can take some time off. I think setting boundaries without explaining them and saying the reason is because you did all this stuff. Because you know what, if somebody's still drinking or abusive, you telling them what they did wrong is going to get them to attack you. Then you're going to miss 3 days of work again. You're going to be so dysregulated. So that's no good. Healing is all about like learning when dysregulation is happening and getting re-regulated as quickly as possible. And when you have a little bit of confidence that you can do that, you might have the freedom to spend a little time limited with your family to test the waters. And then when some creepy uncle is like, hey, I think the example I would give is like, you feminists think you get to just like wear the pants around here.
Good Lord.
And you could just say, oh, Uncle Joe. Yep. Yes, we do. You don't have to engage.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like you're almost rewarding them by engaging. They don't deserve the engagement.
Yeah.
You're taking from yourself and giving to them what they want.
Yeah, I don't even know if they want it. Maybe we think they want it. Maybe they're probably just like leaking all over the place with their problems, with their insensitivity and anger. And they're just like, blah, blah. And so it's less intentional than we sometimes think. But even if it's intentional, it doesn't matter. We can engage politely. So I'm a big fan of just coming up with a pleasant thing to say and talking to the next person and then going, okay, 4:00. It's been so great to see all of you. And you can leave. And that way you keep that connection open. I think that we can't underestimate how important loving relationships are, even though some of our families are pretty screwed up. Mm-hmm. But they're only okay for us if we are in a place where we can handle it. So what I often teach people is bookend it. Talk to your friends, before you go, talk to them when you get back, have a plan B to get out of there early if it starts to get crazy, and just have something that'll keep you from, plummeting into losing your emotional stability, losing your productivity. That's the big one. Productivity crashes from upsetting incidents. Right. And just being able to kind of stay in your path, to stay on your path no matter what's happening. And that's confidence, that when you know that I can deal with people and I can know when to leave, I can know when to speak up for myself, I can know when to keep my mouth shut, more or less, and for my own best interest. And that's confidence.
Okay, boundaries. That was, for me, the big message from that answer. So what advice then would you give to someone, this came up more than once, for an adult where they are the sole care provider for the parent who provided that crappy childhood? Mm-hmm. In the case of one Shandy, the other parent had passed away and the other sibling had died by suicide. So this Shandy is now the sole provider for that remaining parent.
Mm-hmm. That is so hard. I think that's one of the hardest things out there. People end up racked with guilt, and it takes so much out of them to deal with that parent. Some people have decided they're still not going to take care of them. They're going to go ahead and exit. The state can take care of them. That's something they can do, or they can recruit help, or they can go to caregiver. This is a really hard situation.
Yeah.
And
you don't have to have an answer.
Yeah.
There's no answer.
There's no answer.
Some things have no good answer. It's a hard situation. But I teach this thing called ninja boundaries, which is you don't have to engage with the thing. You can say, I love you. I wanted you to have groceries, Mom. Here you go. Do you have enough toilet paper? All right, good. Here's my number if you need me. Hug, goodbye. Right. So it's really about like taking care of yourself, even as you take care of your desire to show up for that parent.
It's almost like holding your nose when you eat broccoli if you don't like broccoli as a kid.
I guess it is a little like that. In the long run, I think our culture can be very quick to dispose of people. And I totally understand that sometimes that boundary needs to truly be set. But when it's possible, that to be able to give love to somebody who's just kind of messed up and broken and has ruined their life and alienated their kids, it is a fine thing to do if you can.
One Shandy asked, my codependent mother wants to be my friend. Is it okay to tell her I need a parent?
Do you have any idea how old this person is?
No.
Well, I'm going to say something a little bit like unpopular opinion. You don't need a parent.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an adult, you don't need a parent.
You can parent yourself.
I like it.
You don't need to parent. Some people call it parenting. You're an adult. You don't need parenting anymore.
Yeah.
Okay.
Parenting is over. And that's a sad reality. If you didn't get parented properly as a kid, sadly, you got robbed. You're not going to get that back. But I understand that a lot of people, they frame it as, I'm going to reparent myself. I'm going to help myself eat a healthy meal. I'm going to help myself leave the Thanksgiving earlier when it starts to get rough. That they would call that reparenting, but it's in no way is it parenting. It's a different thing. And so we learn to take care of ourselves, and there are workarounds that really do help. I think some injuries are like something that can heal. They're like a skinned knee. You can get better. Some are like an amputated leg. You're not going to get another leg. But you might get a prosthetic leg and be able to function pretty well. And I think trauma is like that.
Wow.
Oh. I love how Thanksgiving is always the example.
Thanksgiving. It's like a horror movie.
Yeah.
I feel like whenever anyone talks about dealing with family, it's like, think you're enlightened, spend Thanksgiving with your family.
Yeah, does anyone have a good Thanksgiving? Does that exist?
Why is it harder than Christmas or something?
I don't know. It's something
presents.
something about Thanksgiving. Yeah, you don't have the Christmas music. I don't know.
Yeah, there's no fairy tales. It's just eating and arguing and hating each other.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on now. That was the dealing with parents today section. That's what I had titled it. And we're going to move on to healing, because I was actually surprised at how much this one came up. Do you believe that childhood trauma impacts one's own decision to have or not have children?
Well, I think some people could go both ways, really. Some people will say, I am clear I don't ever want to bring kids into the world because of that. But I think that's sad and cynical. And other people go unconscious every time they have a sexual relationship and end up pregnant. And so kids, kind of, that happens. But I will say for myself that having kids has been one of the most healing things ever. And I had kids under difficult circumstances. It was before the phase of my life where I really had my game plan and did things in the right order. I didn't do them in the right order. and eventually married my kid's dad, but it was sort of a surprise accident with somebody I didn't know the first pregnancy. We ended up having 2 kids and we're still friends. And being able to parent them and to experience that love between parent and child, I think has been very healing for me. And I did quite a bit of my parenting as a single mom. It wasn't easy. And I know it may not be for everyone, but I love my kids so much. And it's really important to me to parent them as best I can. And I feel really guilty about times I couldn't get it right.
I imagine you're very good at it.
Yeah.
I think so. I think so. But I will, one thing about being a single parent is they had to be in daycare all day long, every day. Or sometimes they were with their dad. And one of my sons told me just a couple of days ago, we were vacationing together. And I said, what was the hardest thing? And he goes, well, basically I felt neglected. And I said, but why? But I loved you so much, but I'm so much better than my mom. And he's like, well, we were there at like the YMCA kids club till 6 o'clock every day and sometimes till 6:05. getting the dirty look from the staff. And I was always hustling, trying to get them. So I don't know, I'm sort of telling a story about but there were circumstances. It's hard. It's not easy all the time.
Yeah.
I did a pretty good job. But I really credit the process of having kids. And I was using my daily practice from before I got pregnant to during pregnancy to nursing. And my kids both learned how to do it. And one of my kids still does it every day. One of them does it on occasion. And so I've been able to pass that on. Having trauma is a hard thing. And when kids are inevitably going to see you in your bad moments. And it's scary to think oh, darn it, I just did what my mom did. They saw me having a bad relationship or something. But when kids see a parent getting free, that's also profoundly educational for them. They know what it's like to see me have struggle. They know what it's like to see me get free over and over and over again. And that's what I think is the gift we give them when we heal trauma. I think when you had trauma, and then you have some healing. And it's not like this finish line or this happy island where now you're healed. It's not like that. It's a day-to-day process. It's a little bit like having diabetes. You treat the condition, you structure your life a little differently. And if you stay on it, you can reverse a lot of the symptoms. But sometimes you have bad days and you just kind of lose it. Right. But if you stay on it, then people who witness you making that transition from feeling very dysregulated, which you can sense, our nervous systems can feel each other, and you can tell when somebody else is dysregulated, even if consciously you don't know, you start feeling stressed in their presence. So you see that, and then you see them sort of make some sort of shift in themselves, and then they're gliding along again. Your nervous system learns from that too. And so I think people who have trauma and who have learned how to manage it a little better have a singular power to bring help to other people more than somebody who never had trauma.
That is beautiful. That is just absolutely beautiful.
I got some chills there.
Yeah, you gave us both chills. That was really lovely. You keep mentioning this daily practice. I feel bad we keep asking you to reveal your secret sauce, but it's not secret. It's not secret. Okay. So you touched on the writing technique. Give us in a nutshell you said twice daily, your twice daily practice.
Twice daily. So it's a writing technique and it's very specific. So sometimes people hear me say this in a video or something where I go, oh yeah, you're writing your fearful and resentful thoughts. But I'm learn the technique. It's got a specific format, because if you were just to list all of the stuff you hate, it could really bring you down. It could make you feel worse. So it's a specific technique that helps you process it and move it off. And we follow it with meditation. And so write, then meditate twice a day. And the writing together with the meditation, a lot of people say, I can't meditate. My mind is so active. It's when you write all that stuff first for 10, 15 minutes, meditation gets easier. And then some people say, well, the writing is hard, but the writing and meditation, they're like peanut butter and jelly. They support each other. When you do them together, they can have their effect. And when I met James Pennebaker and talked to him, sometimes people would use his writing technique. And his technique, I love this data. He found that when he had people, he had students write about the worst thing that ever happened to them. He tried this a lot of different ways. He did many years of research, but they would write about the worst thing that ever happened to them for a period of time, 4 days in a row. And they measured their blood composition before and after, and it had changed. And even a month later, there were changes that had remained, and they reported feeling happier. So I told him, I said, well, my concern is for people with trauma, it would be really hard to just go diving into the worst thing that ever happened for half an hour, 4 days in a row. And so my technique involves you take it a little at a time as it's there. I do these calls every week, and I lead hundreds of people and take their questions. And they were like, I'm trying to dive in, so I should visualize. And I'm like, you don't have to visualize anything. You just name what the thought is, sort of ask for it to be removed or release it according to your belief, and then rest in a very simple meditation. Just have a little rest. And so meditation has had a lot of research behind it to show that it does help brains re-regulate. It helps people kind of reset or get a little boost, a little nap, and get those brain waves back in line. And so writing to release that stress and then allowing some rest, it's just this beautiful combination. And without the meditation, people don't usually last long in the writing. It feels burdensome, or it feels like they just kind of tip over. It's too much. So writing followed by meditation. And then for people who can do this in a group of other people who do it, I have a membership program where people do this. You can read it sometimes to another person who knows the technique, and they don't fix you. They don't tell you what you did right or wrong. They just go, thank you for sharing that. I know what you mean. I feel that way sometimes too. A little relatedness, a witness, and saying it out loud can be a great relief too. This is, these are the thoughts that I have. And it starts to open up that channel where you connect for real with another person who gets you. That's a nice thing.
And is it a repetitive writing? Like, are you writing the same thing down almost every day? If let's say, is it right? Okay. So it's not always something new. It's like you're just trying to exercise this one thing. Maybe you had one incident as a child that's deregulated you, and you're always writing down that one thing and then meditating.
You're probably not thinking about something like that very often when you're just dealing with what's bothering you right now. And so sometimes stuff from the past will come up, but you're not going in and trying to get a comprehensive list. I think of it like archaeology. There's dinosaur bones way down there. And up here, there's a lot of layers. And every day you're coming in and dusting off the top layer. And so there might be something about like, I have fear I'm fat, fear nobody likes me, fear I shouldn't have said what I said. I'm resentful at the post office because I have fear they lost my piece of mail that I really needed for my passport. Am I telling on myself?
That's very specific.
For a friend.
Yeah. So you get this stuff on paper, and it's just a bunch of random stuff. And then some of it is just like, fear I forgot to buy milk at the store, fear I have a lump in my breast. So it doesn't have to be serious. It doesn't have to be lighthearted. It doesn't even have to be true. It probably isn't true. So we go ahead and we call it all fear, because any anxious thought, we're sort of dealing with a bucket of anxious thoughts and then angry thoughts.
Right.
And so when I did the book, my book has an enhanced audio version where I talk people through it. And
I love that.
The book has a whole 36 pages in the back with why do we call it fear? Why do we assume resentment has fear underneath it? And I answer all these questions. What is the relationship to 12-step, which is somewhat derived from that, but it's outside of it now. So it's in the book. My great pleasure is in bringing this to the world. I was as surprised as anybody that the whole channel took off as big as it did. And it couldn't be better, because when you know something that works for something that was unbearable for you, you just kind of want to get on the rooftops and tell everybody.
I'm not surprised. I mean, you have an audience of billions of people for this issue.
Okay, moving on to analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
This came up a couple of times. A lot of people felt that they had very controlling parents who made their decisions for them or wouldn't allow them to make decisions, or if the child had made decisions, they would make them feel bad about them, ridicule them. And that would lead to today in adulthood analysis paralysis, where they just can't make their own decisions. Any tips for those people?
Well, I would decouple, because I wouldn't use that word, because it's not always the cause and effect. Different people end up with a different thing, but I sure know what analysis paralysis is like. So I think of trauma healing as releasing, like putting WD-40 on the arrested development that happens because of trauma. There's a lot of growing up that we can't do because we couldn't risk it. We couldn't have proper friendships with people. Nobody was teaching us the ropes. How do you act in this situation? And making decisions. So a controlling parent or an absent parent would both leave somebody with difficulty around decisions. And that happens to a lot of people with trauma, difficulty around decisions. So I try to keep it simple. The daily practice helps you write the fearful thoughts that you have about, if I do it this way, it'll be this. If I do it this way, I have fear this, fear I'm going to get it wrong. If you're doing it twice a day, you will quickly figure out the course correction is almost immediate. You start making a wrong choice. And I always joke around. It's I have to date this person. I know they're the right person for me. And then very quickly you're like, nope, I was wrong. And you can pull out of it. Even if you have abandonment wounds, when you have somewhere to take all that pain and fear that you're not going to be okay, you're going to be alone forever, and the thoughts that come up for a person who was abandoned in childhood who has to end a relationship, you can end a relationship, and you can endure it if they end it with you. So course correction happens. And so very rapidly we can start to have our experience. A lot of people with trauma avoid life and avoid stressful situations because it's going to throw them off so much they can't handle it. to the point that they can't do people. They stay in their houses. Pets are their only friends, and pets are great. I love pets, and thank goodness for them, because for some people that's all there is, or that's all there is yet, for a being to love. But it's so triggering. So when you can start to free that up, you can start to take risks. Life is friction. And for us to grow, we have to be in friction with life. Like, all right, I'm going to go, enter the trivia contest. I'm going to get a wrong answer. I'm going to be mortified. I'm going to go ahead and write my fear that I did it wrong and resentment at myself, and just get up and do another question. So you have a way to process life's experiences, and the developmental delay, in effect. I think I sort of use that as a figure of speech, but it's really true. Development is delayed. So we're not totally maturing. We're not totally getting our strengths and skills in place for an adult to have a happy life. It starts to happen very quickly. So a lot of people will say, can I just do the daily practice occasionally? And you can do anything you want, but for best results, twice a day starts giving that course correction factor. When you make a mistake, you feel it. You're like, oh, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel right. Hold on, let me back off. And that, for me, the first few years of healing was so much about being confused about decisions. Should I accept the invitation to go for a hike, or should I stay home? I mean, everything would be like just very heavy for me. Yeah. And my friend who showed it to me, she goes, just write, meditate, see what you do. And then sometimes I'd go for the hike and go, well, this was a mistake, live and learn, or vice versa. And so that's what we need. We need friction, mistakes, course correction. And that's how we catch up with that development.
There's a pretty powerful question here. I'm just going to read this from a Shandy. She asked, why don't I remember my childhood? Do a lack of childhood memories suggest negative feelings being suppressed? And if having forgotten is a form of self-protection, is it worth opening the box?
That might be a question for a therapist, because I imagine it could be quite serious. But I know a lot of people with trauma have trouble remembering their childhood. And I think it often is because trauma was more than they could bear. And I think there's a bit of mythology that you must remember everything. And I don't think that's necessarily true. It'll come in its own time if you're using tools that are helping you process your thoughts and feelings. And if they come gently and slowly and over time, that would be good, because then it's not going to break you.
I want to quickly touch on narcissism. Some people came at this with having experienced narcissistic parents, or what they perceive to have been narcissistic parents. Do you think it matters, like whether the perception or reality, like which one's real?
Yes and no. Whatever you label it, if parents were selfish and cruel, that's going to do damage. But I also think that sometimes labeling other people with stuff like narcissism definitely exists. But being quick to label people with that is a way not to look at ourselves. I'm in no way saying that's always what it is, but that's the balance we're talking about. It's easy to see what other people, where they're falling down and where they're being awful. The most critical thing is that we see where we're struggling and start to change that. Things don't really get better until you can start to have that self-awareness and the agency to change the behaviors. Those self-defeating behaviors, that's what drags people down, and they're very much trauma-driven.
Another interesting theme that came up in our questions was people wondering whether or not what they had experienced qualified as childhood trauma. So, for example, one Shandy said, I technically had a good childhood, but have distinct memories of being the source of my otherwise depressed father's happiness. Feeling responsible for his joy has bled into my adult life and my inability to make decisions for myself. Is this a form of childhood trauma?
I don't know how useful it is to try to decide that this is trauma and this isn't trauma, And I think, we sort of call it small t trauma and big T trauma. Like somebody who was sexually abused there's often very distinctive symptoms, and it's dismissive to say, oh, but we've all had trauma. No, we haven't all had trauma like that. Right. But when somebody knows that they're struggling with something, I tell people, who has symptoms very similar to CPTSD is people with autism. There's similar symptoms, different cause. And I say, well, come on into the tent here. If you want to work on the symptom of dysregulation or having trouble reading the room, that's a lot what dysregulation does. It's a lot of what my book is about becoming attuned to be able to tell what's going on and to be honest with yourself about it and able to act in your own best interest. that working on your symptoms is always a good idea. And anybody can start to tune into like what goes on with me. Oh, well, I tend to lash out when I'm criticized. That's a very potent thing to know about yourself. And you can work on that. And if you can change that, it'll totally change your life. You may always be a little perplexed about whether you deserve to have that problem. But I do always caution that word because can be a problem word. It's like, well, I have money problems because my mom had money problems. That's not that helpful in terms of like not having money problems. It's not going to get you to not having money problems. I have money problems. I'm going to read some books and talk to some people and learn how to change this. That's a useful thought. And some people feel like that sounds like blaming the victim. And no, the victim's not to blame, but the victim is stuck with the problem. So on a practical level, it's just so good to focus on like, what can I change? And I think if you can change it like you might have 100 problems driven by trauma. When you change one of them, it usually puts you in a place to see a second one you can change, and it'll start to snowball to where you're really changing. That's a good feeling. And to have that ability to change things is so empowering. So many people, there's a lot of people who have benefited from therapy, but so many of us just went and went and went and didn't go anywhere. And we could talk about my mom for hours. She was so interesting, like a campfire in the living room. I always said we just sit around and stare at it, but it was a limited utility thing to just keep focusing on that when I was having so many problems that I was generating for myself.
I have to, that's such a good segue to wrap. I love that note, but I just have one question that I'm dying to know your answer to. It's one question in this other category I labeled a parent's perspective. This Shandy wrote, my 30-plus-year-old daughter blames almost all of her problems on me. I came from China and raised my children on my own. I had been responsible for cooking, hand washing clothes for the whole family, etc. since I was 7. But I have never asked them to do any housework so they could focus on their studies. I am reading a lot of how to communicate with children and psychological books, and I wish I had done this 30 years ago. On the other hand, is it reasonable to ask parents from a different era to behave like psychologists when they were under tremendous physical, financial, and mental pressure?
Oh, nobody can change what they were in the past. It's sad but true. And a lot of people who come to me for help have been estranged from their kids. And it takes a lot of talking, and a lot of them will go to a therapist for this to understand. I think there's a risk that parents who have alienated their kids, the kids just feel like they can't deal with them anymore. They have trouble seeing their role in it. It's like, but I tried the best I could. And the thing that will work for a parent is to humbly explore and understand what happened and to try to understand how that affected the other person and to sincerely apologize. That might create an opening. But that said, trauma doesn't always flow down the generations. Some kids are abusive towards their parents or unkind or cruel. And there are cases of that as well. So it's nuanced. And sometimes everybody contributes a little bit to the problem. So I think when we're healing trauma, advanced trauma healing starts to empower us to have resilience and strength inside that we can connect with people, even though they're kind of still in some of their problems, and be able to enjoy the love that's there. My own mother died when I was 30 of cancer, and I started healing right after she died. But if I could change anything, I would have healed earlier so that I wouldn't have browbeat her like I did. I was always like, you have to admit what you did. You have to admit how you let me down. And I would yell at her, and she didn't want to deal with me. She was culpable for that stuff. It was hard for her to face it, I think. But also imagine having somebody just like yelling at you all the time when you have cancer. And I wish I could change that. And so I'm not trying to invalidate, I have relatives too, where I don't allow contact with them. I have that as well. There's a time and a place for different ones. But I think the great thing about healing is that your heart gets so strong and big that you can have some loving relationships with people who you do love, and that the world is a better place for having that. And we start to learn to have a little bit more like patience and tolerance for people who are a little screwed up. And I know we all wish that we had a little more of that all over our lives. just a little more forbearance with people. So with parents, I think it comes down to whether it's the parents who are the traumatizers or the kids, what it comes down to is, are you able to basically stay regulated and take care of yourself when you have contact with this person? And if not, you might need some time apart.
That, I'm so glad I held out, because that was such that is a better, even better way to end. Anna Runkle, what a delight. 2 months we were waiting for this. It was worth the wait. Thank you so much for sticking it out with us. We're just so happy that you came on. I found our conversation inspiring.
Yeah,
thank you.
Me too.
It's so nice to meet you.
Okay. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ooh.
Wow.
Oh, that one was it was really beautiful, but it was also,
it shook.
Yeah, it shook. I feel both like a simultaneous lightness and heaviness.
Yeah. It felt sad.
It did.
It felt like this sort of thing that you can't erase.
No.
It's just like you have to live with it, and you have to learn methods to suppress it, and not in a negative way.
Yeah.
It's like get rid of it.
Yeah,
like
suppress. I feel
exercise it.
Yeah, I feel like suppress isn't the right word. It's just like it happened. Like her practicality it honestly felt like a thud. Ugh. Like when we talked about the confronting of parents. I mean, a third of our questions involved confronting a parent. How do you deal with a parent who's this? And like just dealing with the parent.
Important. Yeah. That's not the
and
thing.
she was like, closure is like a nice idea.
Closure doesn't exist. Closure is when you're dead. You're closed. It's closed for business.
Yeah. And I think that's like part of me struggles with that because it doesn't feel satisfying, right? Like you want, especially when you have a podcast that's like about relationships, healing your relationship with your parents or forgiving them. Like it's a nice idea. And I feel the same, like I feel, like I said, like simultaneously inspired and like frustrated, even though I think her message is so beautiful and I think it's realistic. Part of me, I think everyone wants like like a button, like the Staples button where you're like, okay, I do this, I do these things, and then I'm healed. And it's really not as simple as that. It's not like you can get that reaction you want from your parents, like she said.
It's like, why waste your life trying to get closure from something that you're never going to get closure from, like 99 out of 100 times, when you can spend all that energy and time healing yourself?
Andy, very good.
I just got to practice what I preach.
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
That's
talk about dedication. Twice a day.
Yeah.
Think about how many things do you do twice a day?
Well, it's interesting that she got some of this practice from the Alcoholics Anonymous groups because trauma in childhood is kind of like alcoholism in the sense that it's always there and you have to always be checking it. Yeah. Otherwise, it'll creep back and maybe creep back really hard if you let it in.
Yeah.
So I think it's so apropos that she sort of learned the language a little bit from this AA.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense to me. That resonated.
Yeah.
Because it is kind of an addiction. You're kind of addicted to your trauma in a weird, sick way.
Yeah. Without being conscious of it.
Right.
The self-awareness piece was really huge.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was such a recurring theme. Without her even needing to say being self-aware, which can sometimes it's just like, oh, be self-aware. It's like, how do you be self-aware? Yeah. But everything she kept touching on was talking about just looking inward, showing the awareness, like even writing down what you are resentful of. That takes a moment. Like sometimes I think we just have the reaction, right?
It also takes some humility. It's kind of accepting your faults. Was when you write it down, you're like, oh, that's kind of a flaw. I shouldn't be that way. Mm-hmm. It feels yucky, probably.
Yeah.
But then it probably feels good.
Oh, it sounds like it feels amazing after you
like
pair it with the meditation.
It's like taking a huge dump. Everything is.
There was, when she talked about how life is friction and then overcoming it, like negotiating it. It's been a theme for us. We've been talking lately about discomfort, like how growth lies in discomfort. You don't often regret exploring the uncomfortable route,
right? Even
though a huge part of you is like kicking and screaming. You're like, but I just want the comfortable thing. I want the familiar, comfortable, non-changing thing. And the one thing, is a very famous saying that the only guarantee is change. I think I butchered that.
Yeah.
What is it? The only
the only thing that's guaranteed is change. I don't know. I
totally butchered that.
Yeah, I put my own spin on that one. Wow.
Everyone knows what we mean.
No, but I think comfort should be a luxury. It should be a delicacy that you're like, you know what? I'm going to take a half hour of comfort. I'm going to watch a show that I like, that I'm comforted by, or I'm going to have a dessert that I like, whatever.
Yeah.
But everything else in your life should be the pursuit of discomfort and change.
Yes.
And I think that this is a really grand pursuit of discomfort, to actually present yourself with like, these are the things that I'm doing. Look, I'm writing them down, and now I'm going to sit and I'm just going to let them go.
I'm going to marinate with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to do this course.
I think
like very quickly after we stop recording.
Yeah, no, so we will link it below, the free online course that she mentioned. Also, Anna Runkle's book comes out on October 1st, 2024. I'll link it below, and you can pre-order it. But do you have anything you want to add, Andy?
No, I mean, I
feel like you were really impacted by this
it was one of those ones where I was just kind of like I didn't want to talk because I didn't want to interrupt her. I just wanted to let her keep going.
Yeah.
And we've had a couple of those. Attachment Nerd was kind of like that too, although I did talk a lot more on that. But it was a little more jokey.
Yeah.
But you know, it's interesting. We've had a lot of guests recently that have all been kind of coming into this funnel that leads to childhood trauma.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the same themes that all happens in childhood. And you know, I feel like a lot of the advice that we've gotten from these experts is sort of surrounds the idea of not dwelling in the whys.
Yeah.
Kind of just understanding the whys, recognizing the whys, but then, you know, moving forward with the hows and the healing.
Yeah.
And it's easier said than done, but you know, a lot of people, and I think a lot of people in talk therapy, they could go to a therapist twice a week for 20 years. They're going to sit and talk about the whys so much.
Well, it depends on the
therapy.
It depends on the therapist.
Absolutely.
And I think that there are people who aren't therapists who could be amazing coaches through something like this.
No.
And I also think there are people who are, you know, you could have a degree in psychology and just not necessarily be like a good therapist. You know what I mean? I think it just depends.
But even
on
a good therapist, sometimes it's about the patient. Like even if you're a good therapist and you're trying, you're like doing everything you can to like change the train track they're on, but they won't. They're still ruminating. They're like ruminating over the whys over and over again. It's almost like, you know, mental masturbation after a while. And they're not advancing because it's just always why, but this is because of this, this is because of this, this is because of this, and what about this, and I remember this.
She talked about the danger of the word because
yeah, who cares why? I mean, let's find out why, and once you know why, forget about why.
Well, I think then you risk falling into like a story of victimhood,
right.
Which even though like I think in many cases you are a victim, to be honest, but is that serving you long term to live in that place?
No, it's never serving you. Being a victim, I don't think in any way ever helps anybody, ever, not even for 1 second.
Yeah. God, her saying when she talked about like how often does confronting your parents get the reaction you wanted or something, I was like, oh my God, that's honestly one of the like most ruefully funny things I've ever heard.
I feel like that was the closest she came in this interview to saying, bitch, please.
Yeah. Oh, that was good stuff. Like I'm crying. That was so funny.
Oh man.
And what a beautiful message at the end. I really thought twice about adding that last question. You know, it was the parent who had written in, this Shandy, who has a daughter who's 30 plus years old. And it's been an interesting thought lately for me is like someone of a different generation and they're like scratching their heads at us like, you have a luxury to have all this time to think about
growth and healing.
Yeah, all this trauma when I was like working my ass off and just surviving.
I mean that it's a good question.
It is a good question.
Times change though, you know? Times change.
Yeah, and I loved her message at the end, which was not victim blaming, but like there are often times where both parties are contributing in some way to whatever the dynamic has become.
Yeah.
And what if we approached it from like a place of boundaries, a place
Boundaries.
of, the boundaries was huge. A place of maybe empathy, of just, what you call it, forbearance.
Yeah, forbearance.
Yes.
Ooh, I love that.
Good word.
It's like a bank term. It's like, I will allow you for 3 months to be the way you are.
Yes. If you enjoyed what you heard today, you know what we will ask of you, and that is to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow us on Instagram and
TikTok.
leave us Apple and
Spotify.
podcast ratings and reviews. Tell your friends and generally do all the things you do to support a podcast you enjoy and that brings on such phenomenal guests to help you heal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're trying over here.
Yeah.
We're facilitating.
Facilitating.
Yes.
We are facilitating healing.
I mean, I'm making an effort anyway.
Yeah, we're trying our best.
We're trying.
Whatever. Who cares?
Patting ourselves on the back. Okay. Have a good one. See you next time. Bye-bye.